Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the hosts of A Healthy Dose podcast, Trevor Price and Stephen Kraus, for a discussion with Chief Executive Officer of the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, Adam Boehler.
Everybody say something, say something, say something, say something, say something, say something.
You were right.
Perfect.
You ready?
I'm ready.
It's a little smoky up here. Right?
What do you think of that song?
I thought that was a good intro.
That was, for Healthy Dose listeners, I have to admit I lost to Trevor finally. We had a song contest, and that was Say Something by Justin Timberlake, which you can imagine, Adam. Trevor's a big JT fan, right?
I mean, I've known Adam for years. I've always said he's a doppelganger for Chris from Coldplay. So he's into
I get when I grow
music.
the beard, I get that.
It's true.
So we have a lot to cover in 24 minutes and 30 seconds. So, Adam, I think the industry knows you as an entrepreneur, as an investor, as a policy leader, and now an international development investor. So let's start entrepreneurship. You've started multiple companies, two notable ones right now in the industry. I think we've all seen you work as an entrepreneur. You've transformed care delivery. You've transformed interesting industries like lab. Tons of entrepreneurs in the audience. When you're starting a business in healthcare, what do you start with? Where do you begin the process?
So where I focus in my niche was starting companies from scratch, where you have a real opportunity to build a platform business. And it's not easy to find that opportunity. Usually the market fills it in. And you know, really where I form companies have been not straight up invention. You know, that's not been my expertise, and it's pretty rare to find that. But where I found the ability is when you take two domains that don't normally exist together and join them. And so many of you know that I founded a company called Landmark Health. And in that case, and now the leader in home-based medical care in the country. But what was unique, I think, when we started the business was not just that we did home-based medical care, but that we took insurance risk, and it aligned our incentives. And historically, with some exceptions, you didn't have physician groups that had the capital, the ability, the analytics, the actuarial talent to take insurance risk. And so combining those is, I think, what unleashed an opportunity that we focused on. So I tend to look for situations where you can combine things that aren't usually combined.
And you had a venture capital private equity background before that, business development and strategy, I think. What's the skill set in your formative years of your career before you disrupted both the payer and provider side of the lab space? You've disrupted high acuity care in the home. What was the single thing that you brought from the early parts of your career to build those businesses?
I started out my career at a venture firm called Battery Ventures, and what I did right at the beginning was really phone calls. I sourced deals. That's how, right out of school, I joined Battery, and I sourced. And that meant I was in front of a phone calling CEOs to find deals for Battery. And you know what? That experience, it taught a few things. One is, as you all know, sales experience comes to every part of your life. In everything I do in government, and I'm sure we'll talk about it, but one of the skills you need in government if you're going to get things done on the policy is sales skills, because everybody wants to stop you. That's just natural inclination, and so you have to figure out, how do I listen to them and how do I make it work? And so that was one thing. The other thing is, when you're speaking to hundreds and hundreds, in excess of 1,000 companies, you get pattern recognition. And I, to this day, I can still look at a website of a company and tell you with a few clicks whether the company is likely interesting, based on, like, you look at the press releases, the management team, they overview quick if you know the space. And so that's the other thing is, venture is a lot of pattern recognition. You know this, Steve. But that comes in very handy going forward, which is, how do you get to the 80% level and make snap judgments based on aggregating a lot of different pieces of data. And then you have to dig in a lot further to know your business, but that stops you from wasting time.
So obviously I would say one of the more successful entrepreneurs of our generation in healthcare. Not a natural decision to go from entrepreneurship to the largest bureaucracy probably on this planet. So take us through that. Like, I'm sure you had plenty of opportunities to stay at Landmark, to go start another company, and then you get this opportunity.
Healthcare partner role at Bessemer.
To replace me at Bessemer.
I was waiting for the call, and it never came.
That's an easy decision. But how do you, walk us through that decision, number one, and then walk us through what it's like to be an entrepreneur day one at CMS.
So the way I've always made my career decisions is if you have a common set, I never plan out that far. And if you have a common set of values or things that are important to you and you always stay true to that, then I think you always end up in a good place, if that makes sense. So when I was at Landmark, I got a call from my predecessor at CMMI. He was leaving to become CEO of Blue Cross Blue Shield of North Carolina. And he asked me whether I would do it, whether I would take the role, because I'd been doing value-based care. I mean, that's what Landmark does. And in a really nice way, I was like, but no. I mean, it was, Landmark, you start something, you care, right? That's your baby. And he said, well, just come in and meet Administrator Verma, and no strings attached. And the reason eventually I did it, I went and I met Seema, and I really liked Seema, but I did it because, again, for me, you spend so much of your time at work, right? I mean, you spend more time at work than you do with your family. And so you want to think about what's going to make you proud when you're older. So what do you create that if you weren't alive wouldn't be there?
Yeah.
And here, this was an opportunity. At Landmark, when I left, we were at about 80,000 complex chronic patients that we made a difference. This was an opportunity to do the same thing for hundreds of millions of people. And so part of it was you may never get another chance at that.
But you must have been, I totally respect that, I get that, but Jesus, I mean, you're going from being CEO of, how many people worked at Landmark when you left?
About 1,000.
1,000 people, to now you're like, holy shit, how do I get anything done in DC? What does an entrepreneur do? You must have just been banging your head against the wall.
Maybe more importantly, what'd your staff do? Were they ready for you?
Oh, you mean that I was going to be really pushy and try to do a lot?
I didn't say you were pushy.
Well, look, I mean, I was really worried about that. So I called Andy Slav, and I called a whole bunch of people, and I thought, because that was my biggest fear. You leave something where you're having a big impact, it seems like it's going to have a big impact, and then you don't do anything. And Andy's point was a good one, actually, because I was like, there's all this talk about value-based care, and I was worried about, it's taking a long time.
Right.
And Andy's like, well, look, there wasn't an ACO until 5 years ago when I talked to him. It actually is a fairly dramatic transformation. I thought he had a good point. And so what I found going in government, so I was very worried about it. What I found going in government is, given, it's not, I'm trying to think. Anything you want to do, so when I was at Landmark at 1,000 people, you can't turn on a dime in a week. Not in any big initiative, right? Look at what we did at CMMI, right? We put 16 models out in a year. And they're dramatic models that impact millions of people. You could never do that in a normal company. And I'll give you an example. I was riding in the car, when we introduced primary care first, I was riding in the car with Secretary Azar. And I said, Alex, I'm curious, what do you like better? Do you like your time? He was president of a large pharma company.
Right.
What do you like better, this or do you like being secretary? And he said, well, I like secretary much better. And I said, why? And he said, well, think about this, Adam. How long have you and I spent talking about primary care first if you aggregated it all the time? He said, a day? I was like, no, probably 4 hours. And he said, if I were at my prior business and we were making a decision like that, we would spend months and months and months. I'd take it to my board. It would be, and so I think there's some common misconceptions about the government. The ability to get things done is actually fairly surprising. I'll give you one other really surprising one for me is the pace. I mean, it is blistering pace, unbelievably blistering pace.
Why do you think, just to stick on that, why do you think the perception is so different than the reality?
I don't know. And I'll tell you something. I never had any interest in going to government. I've been private market 100. I would never. If you rewind 3 years.
You're like a proud libertarian. If
I'm like hardcore.
Right.
Right. I'm like private market all the way.
Right.
I was. Now in public market too. Yay. But no, I don't know why that, I don't know. But it is a blistering pace. And so when you see...
Do you put a difference between the administrative branch and Congress? Because I wanted to ask you, as an entrepreneur, I know you can be an administrator and you love the policy aspect, I know, from talking to you. But then there's the legislative process. And so, do you see a difference in that?
You're a bit outside of the legislative process in a lot of ways, right?
In CMMI, right. But you interact with Congress a lot. And, well, I'll answer with a little bit of what... So I was sworn in last week. Vice President Pence swore me in, and then we had a reception. And I've got 4 little kids, and they spoke at the reception. And they did a bunch of jokes. The little kid... Yeah, I've got 2 8-year-olds, a 6-year-old, and a 2-year-old. And their opening joke was that they have a lot of similarities with Congress. They both like recess. So that was fun. So that was a good...
That's a good one.
My sister wrote that. It was cute.
Of the work you did, the 16 models, primary care, ESRD, Medicare, value-based expansion, ET3, others, hospital value-based purchasing, what stands out when you're going to look out in the future? And then second part of the question is, what degree of confidence do you have, given the seat that you've been in, that value-based care is here to stay?
So it's a bit like asking which of my kids I prefer. That's a real hard one in terms of picking. I would say, I mean, let me link the questions. I have an extremely high degree of confidence that fee-for-service will be extremely limited. And let me tell you why. Let me start with primary care first and direct contracting. LOI is direct contracting. And let me start out with a comparison. Next-gen ACO, when we introduce that. What happens is you get a letter of intent before, and then applications come through, et cetera. So we got about, I think it was 38 letters of intent on next-gen. And then that filtered through to roughly half the amount of people that actually participated, so like 18, 19 people. Direct contracting, we got 1,050. That's like 60 to 70% of the United States. And then when you look at that and primary care first, be clear, as those roll out within 2-3 years, you're going to see fee-for-service dwindle to almost nothing. And you know what, the funny thing is, it's like a pipeline. I can see it, you can see it several years out. It will happen based on the people signing up. There will be a very minor portion that is paid fee-for-service based on how it's set up. That will happen. And so, when I think about what we've done, I think about things like eliminating fee-for-service, which was very deliberate on our part. I think, and the other thing I'm proud of, I'll note, is I think the administration, what we did is we went places where a lot of people wouldn't go. Because the one positive thing here is, from a lobby perspective in healthcare, I don't get told, and I haven't been told, hey, as you're doing this, we're real worried about this lobby. So look at where we pushed in kidney care. Look at where we pushed in international pricing index on the drug side. You want to talk about a lobby. I'm proud of that because we were dictated. It wasn't anti that industry. It was pro what's best for the patient and the taxpayer, and that's our job.
Can I push on that? Because I think it's really interesting that we have one of the most innovative parts of healthcare, which is the drug industry. Literally, you're talking about companies that are coming up with cures for cancer, cures for blindness. We never thought that this was going to be possible. And yet you have candidates out there who, are slamming the drug industry and the like. And so if you were an advisor...
And then getting drug-eluting stents.
Who might have had heart attacks, benefited from the drug or medical device industry, and then are on the campaign trails slamming the industry. I'm a Democrat, but I say that with full nonpartisan, perspective. If you were an advisor to the drug industry, they're a small 10% of, I think, spend or something like that. Obviously, especially pharma's growing. But what would you advise them? Why are they losing the war in terms of, the political or the marketing PR war out there in America?
Because they charge the United States citizen much more than other countries. The other countries pay a quarter to a tenth what we pay for this exact same drugs. And so let me be clear, as I said, my role when I was at CMMI is not to dislike any industry. It's to defend the American taxpayer and the patient. That's all, right? Your job is to block out everything but that. And so what I think about and again, let me be clear, there are clear life-saving treatments, and I'm positive on what the industry has done. That's not the issue.
Yeah.
The issue is the fact that other countries pay significantly less than us, and we subsidize. So when we talk about other countries' healthcare systems, the UK, Germany, and what percentage GDP is, well, switch and add 2 points and take 2 points away from us. And that's not fair. And if you look at IPI, it's really not meant to harm the industry. If you think about how it's been proposed, it bleeds in over time, right? With the idea that if we're here and they're here, it's going to go like this. Because I'll tell you that drug companies are very good at negotiating. It's a core competence, like a health.
They are. Yep.
So that's the intent. It really isn't an anti-industry. It's saying, fair is fair from that perspective. And I think skinning that cat would help drug companies a lot, and I bet they could end up in a place where it's a redistribution. I don't think this is an issue of EBITDA as it stands. It's an issue of distribution.
Of who pays.
Yes, and we are contributing way more, and that's not fair.
America first.
Let's stay on branding for a second. The Affordable Care Act was...
That's why I have my Bud Light.
I'm a Boston guy. I got my Sam Adams. Trevor's got the
Stella.
hoity-toity
Yeah.
ex-US beer.
So let's stay on branding. The Affordable Care Act intended to drive and push the consumers to engage more in their health care and then push the system to value-based care, and it was suddenly branded Obamacare. Both consumer engagement in health care and value-based care appear to be truly bipartisan agendas, and yet the concept, the branding of Obamacare has created a huge amount of backlash. Now apply that lesson to Medicare for All. Are we making the same branding mistake, or if we called it Medicare for all who want it, or Medicare for all who need it, or something different? Is there a branding mistake in that, or do we think there's merit in that program?
I mean, look, I think, quite frankly, branding-wise, it's not a horrible brand because it's simple. So I'll give it a compliment on the brand. In my opinion, it's more the content versus the brand. Yep. On whether something will work or not. But I will tell you where I focus, because I think this is the opportunity, eligibility, what people covered. What's most interesting here is setting up the incentive system so that people get paid for outcomes and not for volume. That's where you're going to reduce costs and improve quality. I'm happy that's where I focus, because I think that's the most important thing, and that's where you're going to make a big difference. Some of the other areas that are more politically charged, quite frankly, I don't think they're as pertinent to reducing costs and improving quality. Take Obamacare or ACA. The amount of spend in ACA, aggregate, relative to Medicare and Medicaid is a rounding error.
Yeah.
It's a rounding error. So if we're really talking about content, and it's so politicized, right? So I was happy that wasn't my focus, because I was focused on a problem where it actually is really important to all of us and all Americans. And so that's where I focus and why I think there's a lot of opportunity.
I think recent stat that I saw, you'll know far better than I do, is just over 60% of Medicaid population is under some form of managed care contract. Is there a future for Medicare or Medicare Advantage type programs being driven into managed Medicaid? How do you see, because there's no rounding errors there. That's
right.
$700 billion.
No, that's real. I think the biggest issue you have in managed Medicaid, and where we're trying to move there, is ASO contracts, right? So you have managed Medicaid that their pricing changes every single year. And so if every single year, if you make improvements and you only lower the price you're going to get the next year, what incentive do you really have? And I found, again, in business, I would come in, and part of our value proposition in my former business was we'd come in and we'd say, look, we'll take 40% of cost out while greatly improving quality. And sometimes you'd speak to Medicaid managed care plans and they'd say, oh, that's fantastic. Could you just do like 2% a year? And I don't fault them. It's our fault in the government, because if you don't have a longer-term view of things, you're not going to invest in that way. So a lot of one thing you'll notice in some of the things we're doing on the managed Medicaid, some of the duals plans, is to try to extend out and have somebody actually have accountability for a population, because then you invest and do the right thing.
How have you, I think we want to get some more lessons and benefits from you, but as a businessman who's gone to politics, who has probably stayed below the fray, I mean, it's a crazy time in American politics. On both sides of the aisle, but it's a crazy time. It's crazy in DC for sure. How did you, I mean, healthcare is the most important issue, as we know, in this election cycle, and almost every election cycle, right? So how did you navigate the politics of it all? Like, what would be, if people are sitting here thinking, as crazy as you, I want to sell my business and go into public policy, what would be lessons you'd say?
I mean, I think it gets back to, well, first of all, let me gate that I have the luxury of being in a role, and my role right now, that is a bipartisan supported role with bipartisan goals. And so not everybody has that luxury. So it's not, but I will note, and it harkens back to your first question about what have I learned in business, or what do you take? And what I learned in business and what do you take on these things is when I say being a good salesman is not convincing somebody what you think. A good salesman is listening and finding the right approach that works and taking into account what they say, and if it's right, adjusting your approach. And so when you take that approach, it's not always the approach used in Washington. And I never forget, independent of party, we're all Americans, and you want something core. Sitting and saying in healthcare, we want lower costs, improved quality, that's an American thing that people want. That's not a partisan thing. Everybody wants that. We share that. And so if you think about good policy, and you listen to both sides and you try to incorporate where it's reasonable, where it benefits the patient, that's where I think you can bridge gaps.
Has this made you more or less interested in politics?
I think...
Are you running against Cuban in 2024?
That's right, yeah, I'm sure he has I have 2 Twitter followers. He has 400 billion. I like Mark, actually.
The new sign of success for presidential elections.
Like I said, I never plan, and I never thought I'd be where I am. Do I really think about elected things or something like that? No, I guess you can never count out anything because I never would have told you I'm in government, but it's certainly not, I'm not building to anything like that.
Darn, I want an announcement here.
I feel like no matter what, I would have to answer it that way. So that's the true answer. But even if I was secretly planning, I'd have to lie and say that. But I'm telling the truth.
So before we leave CMMI, because we want to talk about where you're headed, all the entrepreneurs in the room. You're an entrepreneur. If you were leaving CMMI right now,
I'm an investor. I want to know what Adam would do
What
next.
should Steve be investing in, and what should all of these entrepreneurs do?
Look at the areas where look at pushing accountability down. So anything that's going to either take accountability for a patient population, technology to help them do that. Clearly, there's a big focus on interoperability. And then in the specialty areas, we're doing a lot on the kidney care. Kidneys need to transform. People know that. It needs to orient toward home, toward a transplant, and we're changing those incentives. My own view is if you're going to make a difference, you change how people are paid. So follow the money in what we're doing. And I think you'll see that in every other specialty area. One of the things we're really trying to do at CMMI, and I think it will benefit entrepreneurs, is if you think about the generations of CMMI, right? At first you get kind of let a million flowers bloom, which is appropriate at the beginning. CMMI is a startup. Part of what we tried very hard to do is kind of build it so it scales. And so you have predictability. There's a chassis that every model is built on. So if you look at our kidney care models and you look at the primary care models, the base is the same. Mm-hmm. How we're doing risk adjustment, it's the same. Slight alterations. There's a reason for that. So I think it will be a lot more predictable and a lot easier to build businesses in that way.
In Medicaid as well as Medicare?
In Medicaid and Medicare, yep.
Regardless of party.
Yes. Political party?
Yes.
Yes.
You guys have been in many ways more aggressive in the last year and a half on value-based care than predecessors, right?
I think
it's
we built
fully
on
embraced.
It. Yeah, look, I don't think we have different visions. I think we built on the base that they have. And, you always worry, I think, in Washington, right? And I know people worry, do you spend a lot of time building something and then a party comes and dismantles it, right? And what I'm proud about here is that won't happen.
Yeah. What is open?
Well, that would be a real accomplishment.
Yeah, and that's why building bridges and it's not just about, I want to do that so I don't get a hard time in Washington. One, you want the right answer. Because if you get the right answer, then people continue it, and that's important.
Where are you heading now, and what are you kind of sad that you didn't finish in leaving CMMI?
So I took a role, new agency. It's called the International Development Finance Corporation. It's basically like the World Bank of the United States in a way. So what we do, we have $60 billion. We invest in
It's a
private
small
businesses.
sum of cash.
Just a little bit. But we invest in private businesses to drive development, U.S. policy. We also happen to be the only agency in the United States that makes money for the U.S. government. We
Really?
returned $300 million to Treasury last year, $425 million this year. So we have, it's the triple aim of development, which is drive global, take people out of poverty, drive national security, while making money for the taxpayer. That's why I took the role, because I thought this is a huge ability to make an impact. It was new. It's an ability to set it up, super bipartisan. So that's why.
Trevor, we're gonna have to do like a healthy dose at the International Finance, conference.
I don't know if we'd survive that.
I want to learn more about this.
So we know you can't disclose who your replacement is, but are we all going to be happy?
Yes. I worked very closely with the secretary, with the administrator, to identify somebody that I think has extremely similar values, that's very concentrated on doing the right thing, and I think everybody will be very happy. I think the individual will not only continue what we've done, but will advance and build and come up with their own innovative spin, but they believe very much in what we've done.
Adam, as I'm someone who believes deeply in government, I know there are a lot of cynics out there, but honestly, having someone of your quality, your intellect, I mean, I'm sure the audience saw today, this is a peer and a friend who is super accomplished, and I'm so glad you're staying in government. I think it's Boehler 2036, I heard today.
Oh, yeah.
I'm on that campaign,
Yeah.
so thanks a lot, Adam.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, guys. Really appreciate it. Thanks for having me.